2, 1. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Corpus Magna podcast. Myself, Leo, will be the host. Chung and Brian will be the co-hosts for today. This will be our very first episode, and I'm excited to share with you that we have a very special guest. She is a world level powerlifter, a very skilled physiotherapist, if not one of the most skilled in Australia, who runs a clinic down in Sydney that is composed of like physios that are highly skilled in various sports. She is the one and only Pei Gan. Pei, how are you?
What a great introduction. Now I can't talk anymore because I have to leave. It's too good. I'm good. How are you, Leo?
Always good above ground, man. Always good. So yeah, this podcast, I was simply thinking of having a discussion because I think lots of coaches, including myself and Brian and Chung, have a lot to learn, especially from the perspective of an allied health professionals like yourself, Pei. Things like how to streamline the progress of an athlete. Who knows, maybe we will segue to like injury and or pain mitigation management down the line.
Yep.
So Pei, probably I'm going to sort of like start with one question, when it actually comes to progress and such, some people believe that injury in itself, although there's like various mechanism, it's more than what meets the eye. I was simply thinking, not to necessarily ask your stance, but some believe injury is inevitable, as you train, as you progress, but some believe it may be mitigated, even avoided. What are your exact thoughts on this, Pei?
Okay, so I do believe that injuries can be mitigated. There are obviously sometimes things don't go to plan, or movements don't go to plan, and that is where you can't avoid that. So that's what they mean by that unavoidable injuries. So I don't like going, in terms of my opinions, I don't actually like going black and white. I do know social media does that, but that's probably to get views. But I do believe that injuries, quite a few injuries, especially in sport like powerlifting, where the environment is a lot more controlled than, let's say, a field sport where someone else is just literally tackling you from every angle, that it can be mitigated.
Yeah, and I am actually inclined to agree with Pei, simply because like when it comes to programming, I believe us Corpus Magna, I like to refer us as more science-based, and based on the scholarly article that has been posted by, lots of people. Can name you a few. Crozier in 2004 discusses about that imbalances leads to injury. Stromback in 2014, later on, after a decade, says that muscular injury could be caused due to poor load management, etc. And then again, Ludwig 2017 says that posture imbalances leads to injury. And maybe, on a general outlook, powerlifting may seem like, a sagittal plane dominant movement. But what most people overlook is that there's another two planes of movement, and do you actually believe that as we sort of like progress down the line, you should cater to the different planes of movement and possibly strengthen the muscle that facilitates such, movement competency required to traverse such plane?
Yes, so I would definitely agree that when we look at powerlifting, it is a more sagittal plane movement sport. However, I do believe there is transverse and coronal plane is very important in strengthening. I'll just give you an example of like what I usually talk to people about. So I like to have two words: specialization and under specialization. Okay, so we'll relate this just to athletes in general. So if you practice the same movement over and over again, you become specialized at your sport. It doesn't have to be powerlifting. It can be anything. And so when you start off and at the beginning, you start off a newbie, you're under specialized. And then your goal is to get as much specialization as possible, strengthen the muscles involved in getting towards looking like a powerlifter, moving like a powerlifter, or moving like a diver, moving like a gymnast, right? So, but then eventually when you spend a very long time in the sport, what happens is you can become over specialized. The reason being is because you keep working the same muscles. So if you notice with powerlifting, when you start off, it's all about retraction, downward rotation, pull down with the shoulders, external rotation, a lot of back extensor focus. So you become like this really open kind of walking around like that. Yeah. That becomes a problem. That is not a problem if we are in our mid ranges, right? So we keep getting stronger in that position. It becomes a problem when we end up in our end range, and that's what I call specialized. Okay, so that's why what you'll notice is a lot of powerlifters get a lot of back problems, but they feel it more in extension versus flexion, especially like yourself, Leo. How long have you been powerlifting for?
Competitively close to 6 years. And funny enough, I think back in 2022, when I was prepping for Worlds, alongside you, I was stuck in extension, remember?
Yes. So that's what I feel like most injuries actually come from, is that coaches, not because they do it intentionally, but we're so focused on get the squat, bench, and deadlift so strong. So you get everything in extension to the point that if you look at every powerlifter, their back extensors are thick, right? And then you look at their abs, if they are very lean, they have abs, but you can see a stretched out appearance, an anterior tilt. Your abs don't look really square, they look more pulled. Yeah. So when that happens and you end up at end ranges, that's when you get those blocks. Okay. And this happens to every athlete. This happens to a diver, could be the complete opposite, where they get stuck into so much flexion that they get blocked, and then they have the opposite issue. Yeah. So the reason why I do believe that these transverse plane movements and sagittal plane movements are really important is to get these lifters out of those positions. So in everyday life, one, you don't feel like you're stuck in jam constantly, but two, the goal, especially in a squat, if you deadlift, you can kind of cheat it a bit, where you can just keep extending and keep looking out, right? Squat, you lose your balance, right? Squat's all about balance. So if you're too extended, your body, when you're pushing, will shoot you back to try and find what we call, what's that called? What is that called? It's such a simple word and I can't think of it.
Center of mass management, center of gravity.
To find your when your rib cage and your pelvis are aligned. Yeah, to find that ability to push. Yeah. So if we are in terms of squat would be the movement that will punish you the most if you don't have balance, if you don't have your center of mass in the right spot. Yeah, it'll shoot you back and then you'll extend through your back, because your body will always find the muscle that's strongest for you to use until you end up at end range and it starts hurting like crazy. Yeah, so those are the things that can be mitigated. Those are the things that, okay, let's see if it is coming from your pelvis, your anterior tilt, is it coming from your ankle, is it coming from, and what you do in terms of rehab, or even in strength training, you train the opposing muscles, you train your abdominals, you train the hamstrings. That's why that's starting to become so popular. You train your obliques, because your obliques attach from the front across, right? So it brings you down. And then you can create more of a better center of mass. And the word I was trying to think of is stacked. You create a more stacked position to drive up. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just kind of like jumping in as well. Like, I remember like there was this, I can't remember, was it like a post or a YouTube video? It's a while back with like Ed Cohen,
Yeah.
And like when he was getting like his assessments, he's basically like in like full like extension. He was getting like really
Yes.
like mad back pain. And
Yeah.
then when like the physio, or I can't remember who was like assessing him, was like, dude, like you're strong as shit, but like you're just like puffed up. Like
Stuck.
you walk,
Yeah.
you're stuck there. Like his literally like
Exactly.
his scap, apparently his scap was
It's
he had
very
so much
diluted.
muscle.
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
scap couldn't retract.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't go forward. It was just
Yeah.
stuck there. It was like, huh. And I think like it also brings like a really good point, right? Like with like specializing in things where we tend to do it so repetitively, we tend to forget like, actually, you know, once we get out of the sport or day-to-day life, if we keep
You need to actually
repeating,
bend down.
yeah, you actually need to bend down.
Yeah.
And a takeaway from Pei as well before, I know Brian, you've got something to chime on, is from what I've heard, for what you just said there. So essentially what you're saying is people who squat really good essentially have better balance than people who can't squat.
Yes. Yes. So if your squat is probably the weakest lift, you know, and if your bench is, let's say, the biggest lift, you know, you're very rib cage up, anterior tilt. Yeah. And I'm just talking about the sagittal plane because it's easier for you, like for me to just talk about that for now. But if you look up the anterior oblique sling and the posterior oblique sling, all muscles are basically work together and attached by fascia, right? So there is a continuum of powerlifters are very strong in the anterior oblique sling. So you've got the lats actually pulls down all the way to your pelvis, so it opens you up this way. And then both sides, so it opens you up that way, right? And then you've got the lats pull you down, you've got the retractors that pull you down, you've got your back extensors. So you basically just end up, and then your hip external rotation, you basically end up just open, right? Because you're trying to fight a force that is pulling you down until you become so strong that instead of fighting the force that's pulling you down, you're just trying to extend and then you lose your sense of mass. Yeah. So that's when the I would suggest that the coach or the physio strengthens their anterior oblique sling over the posterior oblique sling to get them out of those positions of times. Yeah.
I think this is going to segue into a really nice topic, Pei, because we see online, especially from now there's a camp, right? You got these ever since the pain science literature came out. We've got these like, it feels like they're technique nihilists. It feels like they're imbalanced nihilists, right? They're like, oh, okay, everything works, doesn't matter type of thing. And we should just embrace asymmetries because the body is inherently asymmetrical, right? But then it's sort of like, as a powerlifting coach, and like if the meaningful task requires you to be more symmetrical, right? It's just sort of like, even though we can embrace asymmetry and we sort of respect like one foot, it might be slightly pointed out more than the other, we are still working towards a more symmetrical load. I'm just curious to know where your thoughts sit on this like asymmetry versus like symmetry conversation. You know, when does it matter versus when doesn't it matter? Like, when would it be more favorable to be more asymmetrical versus like symmetrical?
Yeah, great question. So these are nuances basically. Both camps are right, but both camps in extremes are wrong. And unfortunately, people hate the word "it depends," but it honestly depends, right? Like when you first coach someone, you have to consider, you know, what they do for work, what the hours they have, how they move to enhance their performance. It's the same kind of concept with movement, right? Yes, we are asymmetrical beings, but in a sport that requires some sort of symmetry, you don't want someone turning their foot all the way to 90 degrees in external rotation and one foot pointing directly forward. Like, that probably isn't symmetrical. But that's when the person in front of you matters. That's when you go, cool, how much is too much? And how much do I need then to change in order for them to look good in the position? Because if I would say all of us, we're all lifters, all of us would have asymmetries. And it doesn't bother us, does it? The only issue becomes one, does it affect performance? That needs to be corrected. Two, is the reason why they're doing that actually because of movement restriction? And then we can improve performance. And three, does it hurt them? Now, if someone is constantly PBing, and just constantly with the numbers going up, and they have like a 10-degree foot external rotation compared to the other, probably wouldn't touch it as a coach, right? Because do I really need to? But if they have that, they're constantly PBing and they're having pain, I probably will touch it because it's eventually going to become an issue. Or if their numbers are dropping. Yeah. So like, I'd love to answer the question where I say I'm on one camp, but honestly, everything that's on social media, what really frustrates me, and I understand social media is a type of platform that you need to say the extremes to get attention, but both camps are right. But depending on the person, like, and the problem is social media, you can't go case study this and someone just watches it, right? You have to be like, never do this, and then someone watches you.
Yeah, and I feel that because I'm an exercise physiologist, so I handle some of some clinical rehab outside of coaching and inside of coaching too. And it's just sort of like, I feel for the new clinicians coming through, because like, I think people aren't sure what to believe. You know, if glutes matter, or like if stability matters, does that exist? Like type of stuff. Like, you know, when you've got two dichotomous camps that are technically right, it's gonna make it tough. Which also is like my next question. You've got some physios under you and placement students who come through your clinic as well. Like, what sort of conversations do you have with these people who are growing up in a social media driven age that encourages these like dichotomous statements?
Okay, so what I usually tell, I actually have a really pretty hard interview process, and the biggest thing we look for is openness. If someone is open and coachable, and we know that they will, we know that when we talk to them, they'll pick it up in the first place. But then secondly, we will actually, like, I'm fine with them, you know, social media and stuff. And what we have here is we have a lot of professional development where we all sit together and actually discuss these things. Sometimes people will head towards one camp. I'm like, go try it out. But then a lot of them, the ones that we hire here anyway that are open, they start realizing that, you know, there are different variations to things, because so where we practice, which is fortunate and unfortunate, if you don't like being a scientist, you will hate it here, because you will be wrong a lot of the times, because there's so many variations of athletes. There's Gen Pop, literally Gen Pop. There's like Olympians you get one day, you know, a day you can get a CrossFitter, you can get a gymnast, you can get a synchro swimmer, you can get a fucking like, oops, I'm not allowed to swear, but whatever, a cyclist, a sprinter, and it just, the whole thing, you never have changes like crazy. And so you actually have to find a system of assessments. So we have a full system of assessments, but we never say that is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. We always encourage these conversations of like, why do you think you're doing that? And we always encourage that if you are wrong, give it a go. If it doesn't improve in the person, because you have a test retest, that's why you're a scientist, right? A physio is a scientist, an EP is a scientist, because you should always test retest on the spot. So if your concern is I can't deadlift in that position, I'll put you under the bar and get you to deadlift. I will test the exercise or the release. I'll retest it so you can feel it, right? If it gets worse, I know that's the wrong exercise, right?
Yeah.
But obviously I have things of assessments that I will tick. So always have structure. I always really believe in that whole structure and follow a structure, but it be okay to be proven wrong and be okay to tell your athlete, oh, that didn't work, let's try something different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And to have that variety of clients, I think that's a special privilege. Not many
Yeah.
clinics can say that and then tell their physios or allied health professionals, hey, you're going to be challenged through a variety of movement tasks, like
You-
and meaningful tasks
Yeah.
that like because all the athletes are going to have different goals. They're going to be in different tight and sore in different positions as well.
Agreed. Yeah, so it is a privilege, but it's like if you really love problem solving. If you don't, it is very tricky. If you want one answer, it's probably not the best clinic. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, don't sell yourself short, all right? No, pump yourself up. Let's go. We'll move on. I believe Chung, you're going to take the floor.
Yeah, well, this is going to be an interesting question then, because obviously from what it sounds like, you clearly aren't someone who's very black and white.
No, definitely not.
But I'm obviously not going to put you on the spot and try to say this or that. But this is probably a very interesting question, just coming from, I guess, just trying to understand, because you work, I guess, predominantly, well, I would like to think at least with mostly powerlifters. Obviously, you do work with other like divers and Olympians. There's people on your team who work with Gen Pop too. But there's a lot of, I guess, from what I understand so far is cool. For powerlifting specifically, we've obviously got the squat, bench, deadlift. We obviously need to get better at it, right? We need to get as strong as possible. And we should ideally add assistance work or unilateral training, depending, to assist with either pain management, or if it helps with performance increase, we do that.
Yeah.
But I guess outside of powerlifting, and I guess I'm speaking more in terms of like things like maybe, I don't know, like golf, or even like fight sports particularly, there's or even like runners, like marathon runners.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of, well, not an emphasis, but I think there's also a lot of prehab, rehab, or training around like wrist and ankles. And I'm just kind of curious because like personally, like what I tend to find with when some clients come through, and with myself as well, in a squat, particularly with like a low bar, when your wrist is like super cocked back, obviously, you're gonna definitely put some strain on the wrist, right? And like for the ankle, for example, if you're going through a dip, I guess more for a squat, it to a degree helps to kind of help with extension, albeit probably not as much as the hips. But is there any validity into incorporating some level of wrist and ankle training? I mean, obviously the caveat that if their wrist and ankle is hurt, you probably will look at that structurally from a physio standpoint. But would you think like that's probably in the context of powerlifting, like just overkill? Like you probably don't need it just because, well, the circumstance.
In terms of powerlifting,
specifically for powerlifting in this case,
okay, in terms of powerlifting specifically, the wrist stuff, I wouldn't put too much into it, because a lot of the cock back wrist actually originates from the shoulder. A lot of it. I'm not going to say all of it, but I'm going to say a lot of it. In terms of ankles, I feel and feet are extremely underlooked. Like no one programs ankles and foot stuff. But I would say that there needs to be more, because it is the first point of contact to your ground. It is how you generate force. And if you notice, almost most powerlifters are on their outsides of their feet, and you have no idea why. You just can feel it. When you're deadlifting, you feel your foot leaving the ground. Am I right?
So almost like bending like outward, like like anti-clockwise and clockwise, like almost pulling out.
So, and that's it. That's literally how you lose your force production, like heaps of force production, and that originates from the ankles. If you
I just want to butt in for a little bit, Pei, and also ask the boys a question. Like, how many times have you actively told people like, I need you to press your big toe into the ground, because it sort of seems like everyone's just not aware of their big toe. Hey.
Oh yeah, especially when you squat, like people will like their toes just starts coming up. And funnily enough, I guess, Pei, you talked about balance, and like see how people like they squat, and at the end the toes are like they come up, and you're like, oh shit, they start tipping back.
Do you want to know why that happens?
Please don't share.
Okay, How many of you have sprained your ankles?
Really? Just the
I'm
one?
going through
surprised.
some BS ankle
Or
pain
rolled
on
your
my right
ankle.
side
Yeah,
now.
yeah. Okay.
Oh, Leo, you're not
so-
athletic enough. You haven't sprained anything.
I used to play football competitively, dude. I'm just way too flexible, too dynamic, bro.
Fair enough, fair enough.
So
Damn,
basically, in squats, you're like when you like back then, you're always told to break the floor of your feet. Okay, there's multiple ways of how people interpret that. In our mind, we want to break the floor of feet because we want to get hip external rotation. But some people interpret that as like scrunching their toes. And actually, you'll notice that a lot of lifters will have scrunched toes, and it's like they're clawing the floor. So that's why they lose that tripod foot position. They claw the floor. So they use muscles like the FHL, the FDL a lot more, and they lose that position. They're everters, not all of them. Like you'll notice quite a few. There's a supinated foot, like where they're all stiff and they're like, oh, I have great arches. And those you'll see that they lose the inside. Yeah. But if you know, like now that we've talked about it, you see how many of your lifters actually claw the floor and lose the tripod foot because they're clawing. And that's why I want to talk about how important the calf muscle is in terms of accessories. And the tib
Pei,
band is.
let me like hold you there because
Yeah.
you use some abbreviations like the FHL and FDL, right? Can you quickly
Yeah.
explain to everyone what that is and what they do?
Okay, the FHL is the flexor hallucis longus. It basically flexes your big toe. The FDL is your flexor digitorum longus, and it flexes all your toes, your second to fifth digit. Do you know where the muscle belly is?
Tibialis anterior.
So the muscle belly of those two muscles
The
are
like
in,
posterior calf.
yeah. So are in your posterior calf, but we all just think of gastrocs and soleus. Now,
Yeah.
if we keep using that muscle to push off of the ground, you're going to claw the floor, and then you're not going to push off the ground very effectively. Yeah. So that's something that no one really looks at. If you like, but I do believe that calf raises through eccentric range is very important, and I do also believe that tib ant is very overlooked. Okay, and the reason why I feel that it's very overlooked is when we think of squats or deadlifts, we go, why does that person shoot back? If you're squatting and you're going down in the eccentric component of the squat, no one thinks about that because the barbell just pushes you down, right? But if you assess someone just body weight squat, a lot of them can't do it. Yeah, so I actually really like to assess them without the bar and then put them in the bar, because the bar creates an artificial movement that pushes you down, all right? But it will show in your ascent. The moment, if someone has really, really stiff ankle dorsiflexion, they will get pushed back very quickly the moment they ascend. So you almost see like a butt back and then like a lower back extension kind of movement, because they don't have active ankle dorsiflexion to maintain that position in the first place. The only reason why they can actively, they look like they're dorsiflexing is because the barbell is just pushing them into that position. Yeah. So if you want to maintain balance and you don't have enough active dorsiflexion, you're going to get punished when you ascend. You're just your knees are going to shoot back really quickly, and then you're just going to have to battle the bar with your lower back extensors.
So it sort of sounds like you've got a 10% discount code to a tib ant raise. Is that right?
No, I don't, but I love tib ant raises. But I would also say it's not just tib ant raises that gets active dorsiflexion. So your ankle, people think is a hinge joint, right? So they're like, oh yeah, just tib ant raise. But it's not, because it is attached to your foot, right? So imagine a hinge being put the wrong way, it won't hinge, okay?
Yeah.
So your feet muscles are very important in the sense that if you cannot evert to dorsiflex, it won't dorsiflex. If you cannot invert enough to dorsiflex, it won't dorsiflex. So you actually have to consider these movements before you can dorsiflex it. Before you think of the sagittal plane, you have to consider the transverse and the coronal plane to get dorsiflexion. So tib ant only won't necessarily strengthen it. Yeah. That's that. Was that getting a bit too? Yeah.
No, I love it.
Yeah, cool.
And I
Yeah,
think like
awesome.
that.
Yeah,
That was really good.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Fantastic.
I think that also kind of highlights a lot of, I guess, like the, I hate to use the word traditional means of programming, right?
Yeah.
You start off with, ironically, we talked this off air, top set of whatever, and then you follow with a back off, and then you do your secondary movement, whatever that might be, and then accessories.
Yeah.
But then always the accessories are like, pick your favorite back, pick your
Yeah,
favorite hamstring, pick your favorite quad. But no one
yeah.
says, hey, pick your favorite ankle. It's like,
Yes. Yeah.
It's like
I guess in
foot
some
core
cases,
everyone's missing out on.
yeah. And I think like I think you made a post, like I can't remember when, like with like the neck one where like people get shooting head, like powerlifters getting like
Oh,
headaches.
yes, yes.
Like people don't talk about it. People don't program like weird accessories. People just like, oh yeah, just program the big muscles that move the big things. The
Yes.
small ones, they'll come. And I think like literally like what you and Brian kind of talked about highlighted a very important point, that I think a lot of powerlifters tend to think as powerlifting as like a powerlifting sport,
Yeah.
but there is still a lot of, I guess, positive outcomes potentially by training the smaller things, which will obviously translate to, you know, ultimately a much higher force production
Yes.
in the end of the day.
And also training like no one trains rotational stuff, but
Yeah.
your posterior oblique sling is too tight, you can't rotate. So you need to train your anterior oblique sling to get a stack position. Like you need to rotate. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think people they mistake for powerlifting movements, training for general health and strength, right? And then I think this sort of gets lost in translation for like what actually happens in real life, because like we've had a lot of things on social media which say like, oh, functional training, that's a bunch of BS, and then that just gets overlaid with, nah, squat, bench, and deadlift is fine, right? Yeah, but no one really talks about the consequences of SBDing and how it's like, you know, if you just do that, it's not really healthy.
Yes.
And then
Agreed.
training for health versus like, while balancing powerlifting, I don't really think that gets talked enough more.
Yeah.
As well. So I think these sorts of conversations are really helpful and useful for everyone in the coaching game at the moment.
Yeah, you gotta consider that people outside of powerlifting, yes, powerlifting is a sport, but outside of powerlifting, you don't want to be constantly feeling that just jacked and pain and stuck, right? Because that actually then when you go into another training session, you're like, oh, I'm stuck, I'm blocked, and mentally it affects you. But also physically, if you're really stuck in an end range, it will affect your performance. But a lot of people just don't like being just so stuck that every session, then they don't feel like they want to powerlift. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've sort of seen like, especially young people coming through the sport, who just want that fast, quick rate of progress, but then they don't really understand like the consequences of like this hyper specific programming, 3 hours in the gym, and then they're just sort of like, oh, I used to play soccer and feel real good, but now I'm just shit. Type of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, nah, that was awesome. You boys got anything else to weigh in on?
Yeah, I think when it actually comes to like, the general outline of the discussion, we can totally tell that sustainability and like consistency in doing what you do is probably underrated. People want the quick stuff, it's the instant generation. But then lo and behold, there's more than one things to consider. And, we've had like fructious discussion. You've brought a really significant point, Pei, that sort of like, I believe will be a good takeaway for everyone who's tuning to this. Yeah, Pei, one question though, like, if you actually have an advice, for coaches and lifters alike, what would it be?
If I have an advice for coaches and lifters, one, powerlifting is not a sprint, it's a marathon. The longer you stay in the sport, the stronger you get. Like I actually don't care what anyone says about, oh yeah, this person got really strong really fast. You barely see them next time. Even like, it's not about strength, honestly. weirdly enough, it's about the endurance, your endurance in the sport that gets you stronger. You know that the mentally strong people actually win over the physically strong people in the end. It's just about time in the sport. Two, in terms of coaches, like, don't be too hard on yourself with trying different movements, and don't get so caught up in the social media. I cannot do this, I cannot do that. A coach, a EP, a physio, you're all scientists. So, and whatever the person that's in front of you is what you need to consider over all this posts on you can't do this, you can do this. There's only one answer. Be okay with experimenting, be okay with being wrong, but be humble about it. And then the more you realize, the more you learn and the more you practice, the better of a coach you get. Yeah, so just actually in powerlifting, you should consider, look into rotations, look into things that aren't big in power, like on social media. Look into this anterior posterior oblique sling, learn more about it, and then just put it in some programming, and then test retest, right? Always test retest. Yeah. So hopefully, everyone just stops fighting with each other and just learns how to fucking
Hashtag non-vanilla advice. Hashtag toilet IQ.
I think idolize, don't idolize, but respect
Yes.
those figureheads, right? Respect means you can have those disagreements and not be drunk with the Kool-Aid.
Yes, agreed. 100% agreed. It's just, it's about the person presenting to you. You can't deal with nuances like that on social media. So don't get so into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Try not to be dogmatized. And I think I know why. You sort of like want to know how open people are to learning, in the interview process, because it's simply very hard if you're married to a certain perspective, like, and you are sort of like stuck in one principles, it sort of like restrict you to grow and to find other possibilities, more than one way to reach the top of the mountain. But yeah, Pei, thank you for joining this podcast. I know that everyone probably knows you by now, Miss International, the worldwide physio, but for those who don't, Pei, where can they reach you out?
All right. So my Instagram is powerlifting_physio. So you can find me there. My company's name is PB Physio. P for Peter, B for Bob. And if any questions, send me a message, a DM, and I'll be happy to have a chat. Unless you're married to one idea. I'm joking.
Ooh, shots fired.
So you're promoting divorce. That's what you're trying to say. Is that right?
But happy to have a discussion. Happy to, thank you for having me. Like, I know, like, I'm pretty sure I follow almost all of you, and I always love my discussions with Leo. So it's been good.
Thanks for the brain gains, Pei. I love it.
All right. Thank you.